Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, hi, hello. I'm Jen Manuel. Every week I sit down to tell a true crime story that relates to weddings, marriage, and love gone wrong. I'm calling it Wicked Weddings. And today's story is of badassery and courage. It's about a lady that truly is a badass, and her story, I've heard of it in the past. Hadn't thought about it recently, but it came up again in my search, and it's just too badass to skip over. So this is the story for this week. Susan Walters had not witnessed a lot of happy marriages growing up. Her father, an Air Force cook, and her mother, a homemaker, separated when she was in second grade. Life was chaotic as the children moved from Colorado to Arizona, California, and Nevada, shuffling between schools, homes, and parents. My parents loved me, but they couldn't teach me how to have a successful marriage any more than they could teach me how to fly, she says. Susan became a licensed practical nurse and then a registered nurse. She moved to Oregon in the early 80s, settling first in Coos Bay and later Portland. In 1988, a friend and Susan's mother paid for a personal ad for Susan in the Willamette Week, which is like a local newspaper. Someone different, the 65-word ad teased. SWF 33, overweight but not over life, seeks SM, who wants more out of a relationship than just slender. Teased it did. Hi, different. My name is Mike. I'm 39 years old, DWM. I enjoy most things in nature, from wandering in the ape caves at Mount St. Helens to walking on the beach at sunset. Oh, how cliche, Mike. The day she first spoke with Mike Kuhnhausen, maybe. I am terrible with names. Just terrible. So the first day she spoke with Mike by telephone was January 30th, 1988. Susan and Mike spoke on the phone many, many times before actually meeting in person. Susan estimated it was over 100 hours. He had a nice voice, she says. I was impressed he wanted to talk about the deeper things. For the first date in February 1988, they met at the Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden. Once again, I suck at pronouncing things. Where they fed ducks and Mike tossed unsalted peanuts to squirrels. How lovely. Within the year, they'd be driving to Reno to get married. Mike liked to play slots, and Susan figured that there was no bigger gamble in life than marriage. It went to shit quick. It wasn't very long after we got married, she says, that there was no more hiking, no more getting out. Dear Mike grew up in Portland, adopted as a newborn in 1948 by a couple in their 30s. He told Susan he saw combat in Vietnam, but that's doubtable now. Military records list him as a switchboard operator. Doesn't exactly scream combat. Within a few years of the wedding, Mike got a job as a janitorial supervisor for Oregon Entertainment, the parent company of Fantasy Adult Video. How intriguing. He started to slowly reveal to her in the early years that he'd never really been happy. His life philosophy was, life is a shit sandwich, and every day you take another bite until you die. The couple never had any children, and Susan was fine with that. Mike, who chain-smoked while guzzling Diet Cokes, hounded Susan about her plans every time she'd step out of the house. He watched her spending and complained pretty much about all of her purchases. 17 years into their marriage, Susan had had enough, and I'm surprised it took her that long. I cared about him, but I didn't want to live with him anymore. I wanted to be happy again. So she kicked him out of the house. He moved in with his father, but Susan never changed the locks or the alarm code, which was 12:10, their anniversary. On the evening of Wednesday, September 6, 2006, the 51-year-old emergency room nurse ended her shift at Providence Portland Medical Center and headed to Perfect Look Hair Salon for a little me time to unwind. An hour later, feeling good and relaxed, she drove home to her one-story Cape Cod-style cottage in southeast Portland. In the mudroom at the back of the house, Susan found a note by the microwave from her husband of almost 18 years. Dear old Mike. Sue, haven't been sleeping. Had to get away. Went to the beach. Love, me. He added that he'd see her on Friday or Saturday. Unlocking the door to the kitchen, Susan heard the beeping of her security alarm. She disarmed it, walked through the house to the front door, and then went back outside. It was around 6:37 p.m., and it was a nice evening. She stood out there for a minute, flipping through her mail. When she came back inside, she kicked off her shoes and noticed how dark it was in her bedroom on the first floor, as she usually opens the curtains in the morning. Suddenly, a man came out from behind her bedroom door. He was wielding a red and black claw hammer, and he ran towards Susan, swinging it at her. Most people, seeing a dark figure coming at them with a hammer, would take off running, but not badass Susan. An emergency room nurse for nearly 30 years, she had disarmed injured men, helped crack open people's chests, and administered IVs in patients thrashing from drug withdrawal. She and all the other nurses at Providence trained regularly in self-defense, learning how to slip out of headlocks and clutches, which is extremely fucking smart. Good on them. When her assailant came at her, Susan crowded him, knowing that the swings of his weapon would be less forceful and would do less damage if she stayed close. His first blow landed on her left temple. "Who are you? What do you want?" She screamed as loudly as she could, but he didn't answer, and he didn't stop. At 5'4", Susan was about 5 inches shorter than the man that was attacking her. She had 2 bad knees, but she outweighed him. So, hoping to push him over, Susan said she slammed her body up against him. He didn't fall. Instead, he pushed Susan's back up against the walls of her bedroom. He then uttered the only words he'd say that night. "You're strong." That phrase sent surges of adrenaline through Susan, and a terrible realization. He is here to kill me. I don't know why. I don't know who he is, but his intent was clear. Susan responded by pushing him back. "Who sent you?" she yelled. She managed to wrestle the hammer from him, and she swung its clawed end 3 times, maybe 4, into his skull. Her dad was a carpenter and had always said a hammer was an excellent weapon, and she knew to swing with claws first. But he snatched the hammer back. Susan grabbed his throat. "Who sent you here?" she demanded, hands squeezing his neck even tighter. The intruder's face turned red, then purple, then darker purple with a blue tinge. Susan was startled by his coloring. She let go. "I don't know what I thought," she says. "I had to get out of there." The man, whom police later identified as Edward Dalton Haffey, caught her as she ran from the bedroom. It was a super narrow hallway. It was like she was trapped. He spun her around again, punched her, splitting her lip. He punched her again. She fell to the floor. The image she saw next still haunts her. "He was standing over me with the hammer," she says. "I looked at the floor and I thought, I'm going to die today." To this day, she's not sure how, but she managed to pull the man to the floor. "I gotta get the hammer," she told herself. And she started to bite Haffey, thinking that if she was going to die, her teeth marks might tie her death to him. Wrestling on the floor, she bit his arm, his side, his thigh. She even bit through his zipper into his genitals. At the same time, I don't know how she thought of this or how she even managed it, but she tried to go through Haffey's pockets, looking for ID or a wallet that she could toss under the bed, chair, dresser that police could find later. She was trying to leave clues. So smart. By now, the fight had lasted about 14 minutes. They were both on their sides in the hallway outside Susan's bedroom. She threw her left leg over Haffey's body, climbed up on top of him, and hooked her left arm around his neck. "Tell me who sent you here, and I will call you a fucking ambulance," she yelled in his face. He said nothing. Instead, he just growled. Susan leaned forward, tightening her forearm against his throat. He stopped moving. She grabbed the hammer and ran outside to the neighbors, who called 911. It didn't take the Portland police long to identify Susan's attacker. Police found a wallet with ID in the man's back pocket. Ed Haffey was a 59-year-old Vietnam vet with a long rap sheet. The day after the attack, a friend accompanied Susan to her house to help her collect the essentials. And while there, in the basement, her friend found a backpack. Inside was a container of Hershey syrup, $200 in cash, diabetes pills, a daybook, a pay stub made out to Haffey, and odds and ends. But an entry in the daybook for Monday, September 4th, 2006 was marked "Call Mike," and a manila envelope listed Mike's new cell phone number. An autopsy would show that Haffey had near lethal dose of cocaine in his system when he attacked Susan that night. When police looked into his background, court records detailed a crime committed 15 years earlier. On February 28, 1991, Haffey arranged the murder of his ex-girlfriend, 39-year-old Georgia Lee Dutton. Her decomposed body was later found along a local river. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated murder on March 14, 1994, and spent the next 9 years in the Eastern Oregon Correctional Institution. He was released on November 3, 2003. After he got out, he moved to Portland, and he was looking for a job. In July 2004, he found one, when good old Mike hired him to clean floors at Fantasy Adult Video. Financial records from the day of the attack showed that Mike drove to the coast, checking into the Lincoln City Inn with a credit card that afternoon. He returned to Portland that night, then spent $339 on a Taurus .357 Magnum revolver at the Silver Lining Pawn Shop the next day. On September 8th, Mike left a suicide note at his father's house. It said, "All I ever wanted was to be loved, and every time I had it, I fucked it up." Then he fled. At 10 a.m. on September 13th, a sheriff's deputy finally caught up with Mike, stopping him in the parking garage of Kaiser Sunnyside Medical Center, where Mike claimed to be checking himself in. He told them, "I have nothing to live for anymore." They put him on an involuntary psychiatric hold. 11 hours later, officers put him under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Authorities didn't buy Mike's pleas of innocence or his alibi that he'd been at the beach. He'd lost his jobs a week earlier. He had no place to live. Susan had named her brother as beneficiary on her life insurance policy, and Mike knew it. But Susan and Mike had paid off their house by now, the same house Susan was living in, and it was worth about $300,000, a house that could be his if Susan died. By the time Mike's arrest, detectives already had employment records from Fantasy Adult Video to prove Mike knew Haffey, but Mike initially denied any connection. Then he changed his story. "I didn't do it," he told them. "Just because I know the guy doesn't mean I did anything." Other evidence pointed to a plot with Haffey. Security records showed someone that had disabled the alarm at the house while Susan was at work. Mike later said he did it while dropping off the note about going to the beach, but denied letting Haffey inside. On November 17th, a witness told police he'd driven Haffey to meet a bald man in the parking lot of an Applebee's near Interstate 205. Days after that, he saw the man's picture in the news after Susan's attack, and it was good old Mike. He could deny it all he wanted, said Brian Davidson, a prosecutor on the case, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. On August 30th, 2007, Mike pleaded guilty to soliciting Susan's murder. Susan called it a cowardly plan. "If I ever believed you deserved to be dead, I would at least have had the balls to kill you myself." She's such a badass. Susan, who filed for divorce the day after Mike's arrest, prepared herself for his eventual release. Susan was once a bubbly and adventurous person, but now she felt like a broken plate glued back together. She sat in restaurants where she could see the door. She switched her driving routes. She'd circle the block if she thought someone might be following her. She lived life on edge. She said, "I'm doing a life sentence for picking a bad husband." By 2014, she had moved to a new Portland home on an out-of-the-way cul-de-sac. Gravel surrounded her house so she could hear footsteps. She practiced shooting at a nearby range. She said, "If he came here, he was not going to get close enough to hurt me." Speaking of him, Mike was set to be released on September 14th, 2014, but on Friday the 13th, June 2014, just 92 days before his release, Mike passed away from cancer. Good riddance, motherfucker. Susan continued to work as a nurse until December 2014. Her job was to save lives. People called her a hero, but she didn't feel the same. "They're not calling you a hero because you killed a man," her boss told her. "They're calling you a hero because they want to believe, given the same circumstances, they too might survive." On September 17th, 2010, Susan received a letter from the hitman's aunt. It said, "Although this was a terrible thing that happened, no one in this family has any bad feelings towards you. You did what you were forced to do, and in doing so, you spared many from the same trauma you experienced." Anybody that could be the type of nurse she had been for so long says a lot about her compassion and love, her neighbor Deanna Hall said. But she knows when to put her foot down, and she doesn't take crap from anybody. Susan survived the attack, but still has the mental wounds from knowing that her husband wanted her dead, and from having to kill another person to save herself. I didn't choose his death, she says. I chose my life. All right, so there's the story of Susan Walters, badass, who took care of business, protected herself, and at 51 years old saved her own life because she didn't give up. She was prepared. She had training. She stayed calm under pressure. Fight back, ladies. Fight the fuck back. Anyway, thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, follow, subscribe, comment, share, whatever the case may be, and I will catch you next week with another true crime story. Bye. Making some edits, retyping my story, because I don't know what I'm doing.